Notre-Dame de la Consolation, 1923. It takes money to build a church, but after the First World War ended, the country was ruined and the clergy's coffers were empty. Le Raincy, a small parish of some 10,000 inhabitants, situated 15 kilometres north of Paris. In 1918, a new parish priest was appointed. He wanted to build a church to the memory of soldiers fallen in 1914 at the Battle of the Marne. But he too was broke. So the story goes, one day an unknown man came to confess, then pulled a 1,000-franc note out of his pocket. "That will be the foundation stone of my church," exclaimed the priest. Encouraged by this start, the valiant priest turned into a man of business, but spurned by all the bankers, his purse remained lean. Hope rekindled on the day that he made the acquaintance of Auguste Perret, an architect and atheist, the son of a communard, who longed to build a church. Along with his two brothers, Gustave the engineer and Claude the financier, he took up the double challenge of urgency and budget. Auguste Perret was known for a number of major buildings, one in Paris in the Rue Franklin, a garage in Rue de Ponthieu, and more especially for the Théâtre des Champs-Élysées. All were built in reinforced concrete. Heading their building company, the three men were the kings of concrete. With this unloved material, they were to renew the language of architecture. Three parts gravel, 2 parts sand and 1 of cement, a little water, and there you have your concrete. Cheap, solid, light, incombustible, easy, and soon put to work, concrete is just a soft, pasty mass. But armed with steel rods, any structural audacity is possible, every technical prowess. It has every quality bar one: beauty. Like a hangar or a simple silo, the church at Le Raincy was to be entirely made of concrete, left raw inside and out, from the foundations up to the cross on the belfry. This was the first time that this so-called shameful material was used on such a large scale for that most noble of architectural programs, a church. The priest chose the site for his future church in the town centre, not too far from the station. He wanted it to be as well situated as a cinema. It was in spite of some inconvenience. The parcel, cheaply bought in the middle of an already densely filled housing estate, was surrounded by private homes or rented properties. The plot is long, narrow, and markedly sloping. The scantiness of the parcel prevented the architect from using the traditional cruciform ground plan, so his church has no transept. Neither had Perret the means to level the site completely to make up for the slope. So he placed his church in the middle of the parcel and made do with levelling the building site. Churches are traditionally oriented towards the east, but as the main facade of the church gave onto the road, the architect was obliged to reverse its orientation. Following the constraints of the parcel, the church would have the shape of a long rectangular volume, like an ordinary warehouse, but fronted by an imposing belfry tower that proclaimed the church to the town. Austere, grey and massive, this facade conceals an immense and luminous nave. A huge glass cage. A church is above all a collective space where the faithful can come together to celebrate their cult. The priest officiates before the altar, the most sacred part of the edifice, on a raised chancel from which he dominates the congregation, as in a music hall. "56 meters long and 20 wide, this volume surprises particularly by the simplicity of its plan. It is a parallel-pepered covered with a ceiling supported on pillars. That is a principle of a shelter, a cabin. It would be difficult to be more simple. This space could just as easily be used to house a textile mill, an aeroplane hangar, or perhaps a gymnasium, a conference hall, or even a trade union meeting place. But we are in a church. And while the architect had built his church like an industrial hangar, he now had to endow his hangar with the dignity of a religious sanctuary. The volume of the church is divided into 3 naves by the rows of pillars that isolate the principal nave from the side aisles. The faithful can thus move about as required by the liturgy, and all eyes converge on the altar. Perret took his inspiration here from 2 traditional plans, the basilica and the hall church. In a plan of a basilica, the principal nave is flanked by 2 collateral but not so high aisles that are only half as wide. In a hall church, the central nave is flanked by 2 collateral aisles that are as wide and as high. The church at Le Raincy combines the 2 schemes. The nave and aisles are the same height as in a hall church, but the side aisles are only half the width of the central nave, as in a basilica. Although the ground plan of the church follows an age-old tradition, it reflects a totally new image of space. Here, Perret gives us an unthought-of interpretation of the traditional rules of construction. Thanks to the concrete left apparent here, as if he intended to make his radical ideas perfectly clear. The pillars at Le Raincy rise to a great height. But the prowess is not in that alone. Their slenderness is striking. They have, moreover, been compared to matchsticks or the legs of giraffes. What was revolutionary was the width of the drum in relation to their height. Rising higher than 11 metres, the diameter of these pillars is no more than 43 centimetres. Elegantly fluted to mask the vertical joints of the moulds, all identical, these pillars bear no ornament. Neither capital nor base. There are 28 in all, not a lot for an area of more than 1,200 square metres. But the architect decided to mark their presence. Such pillars are usually merged with the walls and only indicated by a slight protrusion. Here they are completely detached. They can be better seen as being equal to the others. The vault that they carry, imposing and massive to view, is in fact quite light. It is only 3 centimetres deep. It has been compared to the thickness of an eggshell. Making a vault in concrete requires a curved wooden mould in the desired form. This is fixed to a grill to reinforce the concrete that is poured, smoothed and left to dry before the mould is finally removed. Making a pillar is just as easy. The concrete is poured into a mould containing steel rods. Then when it sets, the mould can be removed. Standardized moulds mean that a series of constructive elements can be made, and production costs are rationalized. But Perret was more than a simple entrepreneur in concrete. He was an architect. He was the first to realize the force and purity of this cement mud. Eye and spirit bunged up by the schools, most architects have seen nothing. They think of concrete as a powerful but shameful medium that has to be hidden. They cover it with faded finery borrowed from the past, with coatings, with facings that will inevitably fall away. But an unpleasing material has never harmed the beauty of architecture. On the contrary, the beauty of concrete merely upsets stonemasons. The ceiling at Le Raincy certainly worried some of the parishioners, who feared that the sky would fall on their heads. Perret could have covered the whole volume in one go, but that would have emphasized the idea of a hangar even more. So he opted for two types of vault, a long longitudinal haunching for the central nave, and a succession of arches across the side aisles. Although Perret was not content to cover the three naves with parallel vaults, he dreamed up an ingenious way of covering the side aisles. He simply took the curve of the central vault and turned it round to cover the side aisles. Thus, while the same shuttering sufficed to mould all the vaults, it also allowed him to give dynamism to his ceiling, as well as realizing a not inconsiderable saving in mould making. Outside, the vaults are gathered under a single roof made of a succession of rings, toruses that brace the building. Technically highly innovative, this system does tend to give an astonishing image for the roof of a church, somewhere between a stranded whale and Michelin man's rolls of fat. With this covering that stabilizes the building, and thanks to the lightness of the vaults borne only by the pillars, the walls are freed from their traditional load-bearing function. They could be completely open and replaced by large glass screens. In making this gigantic glass house, Perret's concrete church surprisingly conforms to the great Gothic tradition. He achieved the dream of all the cathedral builders of the Middle Ages and filled his church with light. Light is a fundamental issue in a church. Darkness, calling on solitary supplications and penitence, was decidedly for another time. In the 1920s, the clergy wanted to fill their pews, so it was better if the faithful could see to read their prayer books. Perret, with his audacious realization of the ambition of all church builders, also provided the priest at Le Raincy with a clear saving on his electricity bill. Outside, we are far away from the world of Gothic architecture and its flying buttresses. The walls are perfectly smooth. They are made of glass and concrete. This lattice that envelopes the whole building produces a powerful effect. It is designed by the screen walls, the slabs with geometric openings that are like a fine skin or an embroidered canvas. Where Perret found his inspiration is not known, probably during his travels in North Africa, where these pierced slabs are a way of reducing the intensity of the light. Perret used 5 different models for his screen walls, 3 square units with an inscribed circle, a diamond shape and a cross. To these he added a half square and a quarter square. The components are placed in rows to form a regular and geometric pierced wall. Here again it is the simplicity of the system that is surprising and the economy of means. 5 prefabricated moulds, a single material, were sufficient to make a nearly 1,000 square metre enclosure. Perret could have made an infinite variety of combinations with his 5 units, but these screen walls clad a church. A cross is subtly outlined in each span. Stained glass windows are an indispensable complement to religious architecture. At La Raincy, they are nothing like those usually seen in a church. They are the work of Marguerite Houret, an undervalued stained glass artist who introduced abstraction into religious stained glass windows. For her, stained glass should be nothing but colour and light, avoiding all descriptive detail. Here, the stained glass is contained in the wall piercings. This was far from being a problem for Marguerite Houret. On the contrary, she was able to achieve an astonishing harmony of coloured glass within the geometric openings in the screen walls. She even managed very subtly to emphasize the design with delicate fillets of white beads. There was no budget for painted murals or large tapestries. The stained glass windows provide the only decoration in the church. The Titanic work may seem iconoclastic for a place of worship. Very little space is devoted to the representation of religious scenes. However, the painter Maurice Denis produced 10 pictures illustrating the life of the Virgin Mary. But including them meant the sacrifice of several areas of the screen wall that was not really suitable for representing the communion of the Virgin, and even less for her Assumption. The sole function of a belfry is to indicate the presence of a church. It has to be high as possible. Perret's tower rises to a vertiginous height, more than 43 metres. Massive, monumental, it is like nothing built before. What is the most striking is the way it is hung about with columns. We have seen how Perret economised in the structure of the immense nave, so it is surprising to count 20. And even more surprising to note that only 8 of them are load-bearing. The higher the belfry is built, the more resistant it has to be. Perret could have made do with 4 large columns at each corner. But to save on the cost of yet another mould, he replaced these columns with 2 pillars from the same mould used for the pillars in the nave. And amazingly, to these 8 pillars that form the principal frame for the belfry, Perret added 4 more that carry no load at all. Then 8, then another 4, but shorter. Some people reproach Perret for disregarding the fine lesson in economic building that this church gives. But by using a structural element for decorative purposes, the architect adorned his belfry with the most innovative ornamentation at the least cost. Some saw these as gun barrels aiming at aeroplanes, others as bayonets, and others still as a peaceful telescope. And Perret kept up the good work. He capped his belfry with a remarkable spire made from the same pillar sections that diminish progressively until there is only one. The cross, that too in concrete. This protrusion that has no constructive function was much criticised. Perceived as a simple though relatively ungraceful decoration, this spire appears to suffer from a certain mechanical instability. But as a good manager of constructive components, the architect cleverly reused the screen wall ingredients to consolidate his delicate assembly. The facade surprises. ironically qualified as an austere mask by Le Corbusier, it appears to be exaggerated and difficult to grasp. It is made up of different elements, projecting and not immediately decipherable. In fact, they allow the architect to conceal the difficulty of joining two opposing volumes, the box and the tower, and to fill the void left by the thrust of the belfry. Structurally independent, this facade seems to be stuck to the box, but it's not as simple as that. While these projecting volumes boldly model the face of the church, at the rear they form cavities that Perret exploited ingeniously. Completely open to the wide nave, they make a link, but by an empty space. The volume of the belfry is filled by an organ and a wide loft that opens onto the nave. On both sides in the corners are chapels covered with octagonal belvederes. And on the floor, the screen wall elements, decidedly multifunctional. Here the octagon delineates the font basin of a baptistery. This form is enough to define the use to which a space may be put, but it also very imaginatively isolates and creates intimacy while remaining open to the main nave. In the opposite corner is another chapel to the memory of the soldiers who fell at the Battle of the Marne. It too is open and empty. There again, Perret found an elegant way of virtually separating this area from the main nave. The octagon of the belvedere is just engraved on the floor. In this completely open-plan volume, Perret lodged the chapels in the corners. But other necessary appurtenances for the good running of the church are lacking: an office for the parish priest, storage for liturgical accoutrements, a sacristy, a catechism room, and lavatories. Wanting space, the architect put them beneath the chancel, but not underground. The linen room, the various storerooms and the sacristy enjoy daylight. They are in fact on the garden level. Perret took advantage of the natural slope. It is steepest behind the church. To save the heavy work and expensive cost of levelling the slope, he occupied it. But there is no screen wall for this split level, a real wall in masonry. These blocks piled up rather rudely look as if they're waiting to be rendered, but for our dogmatic architect, plastering concrete was going too far. The Palace of Versailles, the Val de Grâce Hospital, the Dome of Les Invalides are magnificent decors fashioned by great artists, but their aspect is not controlled by their structure. They are badly built. When time overtakes these palaces, it's not the ruins that will remain, but a mass of nameless rubble. That is not what architecture is. Architecture is what makes splendid ruins. The structure of the church at La Raincy is in perfect condition, but some elements have been changed, and the screen walls had to be replaced piece by piece. The concrete that was believed to be indestructible suffered from the speed of the work. A mere 13 months' work on site for an edifice that is still a very fine demonstration of the constructive and plastic qualities of this material, and a major lesson from an architect who time forgot for a while, but who is now recognised as the one who, long before Le Corbusier, revolutionised the language of architecture. Sadly, though, his lesson is not always heeded.